Hello, this is Rich. Today is going to be a tutorial. It's going to be part of what, since the last video I think I said I was going to be doing a tutorial, I can't remember correctly, something about making custom entities in C++ and also controlling them through C++, not involving Lua whatsoever, as in no .ent file, no Lua file, but complete creating an entity in C++, and controlling and managing it from C++. That was one part. I can't remember what the other part I said I was going to do. I'll probably look at the video after. But this tutorial, since it's, what I said I was going to do last time is going to be a huge tutorial, I'm going to split them up. So this tutorial is about creating a entity completely in C++ without any Lua scripts or .ent scripts. Okay, so it's just going to be managing it through C++, some of the reasons why you would want to do this. I'm probably going to throw in a couple examples to show you how you can do things through C++ to affect the entity. But as far as that's concerned, I think this is going to be a very exciting tutorial. I think a lot of people, I think I got a lot of requests for this actually, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, I believe I'm working off of a clean build. I downloaded another version. I have like 5 installs of Cryengine for different things that I do. So for this tutorial, it's going to be a clean install, I believe. Also, we're going to talk about not only creating from C++, but adding the ability to spawn. Adding the when you create it through C++, you don't have access to this. There would really be there's use for it, but it's not for the people I'm doing a tutorial for. They would, since I'm doing a tutorial for you guys are probably going to understand the effects of adding a C++ entity in a level through the Cryengine editor. But so I'm going to cover also in this tutorial another way of making it through C++, but also getting it to being able to be placing the entity inside of the editor, because by default these entities are managed through C++ and everything, and you can't have access to them inside the editor. So I'm going to go how to make them have access to the editor so you can use them editor if you want to. But that step does require Lua. So in order to get entities controllable through the editor, to place them in your world through the editor, you do need a Lua file. No ENT, but you do need a Lua file. Okay. Let's get started. Okay. Opening up Visual Studio's C++ 2010 Express. Not that one. Yep, this is it. Okay. Now I gotta set this. I don't want to use the launcher for debugging. The actual pure game mode. I actually want to use the editor for debugging right now. It may not be the best idea, but I do it sometimes. So right click, properties, and for debugging, we're going to go to command, and it's already set to the editor. But in case you guys have it on the launcher, you can go to, click here, go to browse, and go into your bin64 or bin32 and click on the editor so you can launch up the editor. Here we go. Now obviously I just want to do a quick test. To make sure my code is actually valid. I didn't do any code yet, but I just wanted to do a test run to make sure that we have good code to start with. Okay guys, so it's loading up here. Some people were making some claims that it's not possible to make entities in C++ fully, that you're going to need Lua, you're going to need entities, ENT files as well. I made that claim at one point as well, but it was false. You can make entities in C++ fully without any Lua or ent file. So log in. And I just want to see here. And I'll show you in a second here. Okay. I'm going to go to the Entities tab here. Now, when you expose, you can expose the entities that you make in C++ to the editor without a Lua file or int file. You can expose them like that, and they'll actually simply be placed automatically in the default, under Entities default. Right now, there's only a flow graph entity, so if you don't have a Lua file or int file, they will be placed inside the default folder here. You can drag and drop. It wouldn't be really much use for you, I guess, at that point in time, but you can. Now, if you specify a Lua file that you want to use for the entity's Lua script, then the folder that your entity will be in when you make it in C++ will be a folder that's named after the folder that your Lua file is located. So if my Lua file is located in scripts, all these folders are in scripts folder, by the way. They're all in the scripts folder. So if I had a folder in the scripts called the cat, then I would look on here and look for the cat for a folder to find it. Okay? But if you don't have a Lua script associated with your C++ entity, it'll be placed in default. So we have a good build, I'm sure of it. That's good. So this is going to be relatively easy. There may be some complex parts in here, but I'm going to try to go for it step by step. First thing you want to do is you're going to create a C++ .h file, which is a header file, and a .cpp file, which is a source C++ file. So we just pick a folder that we want. I like to go to My Files, so I right-click on my project that we're working with. I do Add, New Filter. Remember, these aren't real folders you're creating. These are just virtual folders that Visual Studio uses for organization. So I'm going to go ahead and type in My Files like that. Now inside My Files, I'm going to add New Item, and we're going to make this called Tutorial Entity, okay? So for a header file, I clicked on the header file, Tutorial Entity, sorry, Tutorial CPP Entity, okay? And make sure I click again to make it at .h. I'm going to copy it. .h. I'm going to go ahead, right click, New Item, and now add the corresponding C++ file. Paste it, make sure I click on CPP. We have the CPP, go ahead and add. So here we go. Like I said, the first thing you want to do if you're using the C++, my tutorials are typically generated towards beginners, but I guess some of the tutorials I do can even help the more advanced users as well. So when you create these new files, the first thing you want to do, get in the habit of doing, is in the .h file, which is a header file, go ahead and add inclusion guards. Inclusion guards make sure that you don't fuck up when you include things into other CPP files. So when this .h file is being included into other CPP files, I don't get multiple includes. I don't include the file more than once, and you'll get compile errors if that happens. So to stop that, we're going to add inclusion guards. Preprocessor command, $, if ndef means if not defined, give it a name. I usually name it the same as my source file without the .h, underscore tutorial CPP entity underscore. So if it's not defined, preprocessor command, $, define. In the same exact name, very important, it's the same name. Underscore tutorial CPP entity. So if not defined, if tutorial CPP entity is not defined, go ahead and define it. And go down a little bit, $and f. So make sure you don't, after you do this inclusion guards, make sure you don't add any code after the end if. All your code should be handled in between the define and then the end if, all through here. So let's go ahead and create our class, because obviously these entities are classes. So this is how you do it, and this is a very important step in doing this. So each entity you make needs a specific class. Although you can make new entities using the same class. Like I have 10 different entities that do different things, but they all use the same class. Okay. So you do need a class for your custom entity. So let's go ahead and add it. I like to use structs, but in this case, let's just use a class. Actually, no, let's go struct. And go ahead and name it. Now, this is very important to register it in the game factory. You do need to start it with a capital C for some reason. So no matter what you name your class, it needs to start with a capital C. So name it. So we're going to name it C tutorial CPP entity. And we're going to head and we have to derive it off of a certain class in order to make a custom entity. So the class we're going to derive it from, which is a game object, is quite long, so stay with me. C game object extension. C game object extension. Less than sign, greater than sign. Now, the first parameter here is your class name. So in this case, C tutorial CPP entity. There we go. Comma. And then the second parameter is going to be the class that registers this game object that you're creating here. So the game object we're creating is obviously our C tutorial CPP entity. So we're going to derive from this C game object extension helper. My bad. C game object extension helper. And we're going to be our name, class we want to register, and then the factory that's going to register it. In this case, it happens to be a game object extension. Game object extension. That's what you have to be doing here. One little mistake. There we go. Public. So, struct your class name, make sure it's capital C, colon, public C game object extension helper, and then you have the class you want to register, or game object you want to register, which in this case C tutorial CPP entity, and then the what's going to register it, which is the game object extension. That's all you need to derive from. Let's go ahead and create the class as usual, just like this. Let's go ahead and make a constructor for it. C tutorial CPP entity. We're just going to give a default like that. And let's go ahead and create the destructor, just like that. Now I like to separate my stuff, like member functions, member variables, and member classes and stuff like that. So for organizations, I'm going to game object extension. Here we go. Now, in order to actually make use of this class here, you do need to override a couple of methods. That's the whole point of this. Now, so it wouldn't be much fun, and actually I don't think it wouldn't work at all, really, on calling functions and handling it through C++ if you didn't override some methods. And I'm not going to go deep into it, but what overriding methods basically is you have the game object extension is really what we're deriving from here. We're going to take all of our functions that the game object extension has, and those get run by a game object. These functions get run by the game object or called by the game object or entity that it belongs to. Now, what happens is you have a new class that's deriving from the game object extension. So instead of the game object extension functions being called, it will instead call those functions that are in your file, your class. So it'll be explained a little bit more in depth as we go through this, but let's go ahead. So you go ahead and you need to override some methods. So what we're going to do is we're going to see this game objects extension. we're going to right click, go to definition, ba ba ba. iGame object extension. I must have had the wrong class for that. I'm sorry, iGame object extension is what we're going to be using for the registering class. So let's go ahead and right click so we can find out where this is located. In this case, it's located in the iGameObject.h. So bring us to the class. And when we get here, we're going to see all the functions that these things have and a description on what they do. Pretty cool, huh? These are all the functions that the iGame object has. That a game object has. So you're creating a class that derives from the iGame object by using the iGame object extension helper. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take all these virtual functions like the init, post init, init client, every single one. Just keep going. You probably don't need them all. Actually, you won't need them all for this tutorial, but you do need to include them. So right here, all the ones with virtual on them. In this case, we have these inline, or iline, or whatever. So all the ones with virtual means you can actually override them, like we're doing. So now that we got them all, we're going to go copy, and we're going to go ahead and paste them. Pretty cool. So now our class has all these functions. So now, since we overridden them, okay, and that means that instead, when we have this entity in the world, instead of these functions getting called, well, what actually happened is since we derive from the class and we have the same exact ones here, these will get called in our class instead of these ones. So now all these functions will be called in this class instead of the functions that are called in this class. We get a couple of red marks here. That just means that we didn't include the right things. Pound include, oops. iGame object, and that should get rid of all the errors. Should. Awesome. So we included iGame object, we created our class, and we derived from the iGame object extension by using the cGame object extension helper class. So now all of the functions that a game object has is now inside of our class, and they'll get called. And I'm not going to go over these summaries here because they're pretty self-explanatory, and that's the cool thing. You can read those. Okay? But I will go over certain functions, okay, that we need. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to build my solution here. And we should get a couple of errors. Fatal error, unexpected end of file, looking for precompiled header. Oh yeah, in the tutorial CPP, go ahead and pound include stdafx.h. Always include that in the CPP files. But anyways, let's go ahead and build again. I am expecting some errors here. Awesome, awesome. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. If I don't say so myself.
When the technology's right, anything can happen. Get a free Samsung Galaxy Nexus 4G LTE on Verizon. Only at Best Buy. Buying a kit is always a smart move, but right now, it's even smarter. Presenting the key Smart Move sales event.
Let's go ahead and start up the editor. We create our classes. We've overridden all of the functions that are inside the game object, so these will get called automatically by the system. Because the functions in the game object class automatically get run. So now that we got our own class and our own override methods of these classes, these will automatically get run as well. But there won't be any difference because we didn't add our own code in those functions. But I'm going to go ahead and open up the editor. I want to show you something. Everything seems all and well, and everything should work. But let me show you. Let me go ahead into entities, defaults. We don't see that class here. That's because, yes, we created it in C++. We have everything in C++, but it's really useless right now because we can't add it to the actual world. Nope, we have to register it first. Actually, we have to let the game framework know that we want to use this entity, and we want to create an entity out of it and use it in the world. So we do this after we created our class, derived from the iGameObject extension, made sure that our class name begins with a capital C, overridden all of the GameObject extension functions. We need to do one more step to make it function. Are you ready? Go ahead to the game files, and you're going to see something called gamefactory.cpp. This is where you register all your new classes. So we created a class, but the engine doesn't know that this class is going to be controlling an entity. In fact, it doesn't even know it's an entity yet. What registering does is it creates an entity out of the class, exposes it to the editor, and allows the entity, or it creates an object of the class and allows that object to call its own functions, which you saw here. Registering the class with the gamefactory.cpp creates an entity out of this class, lets the engine know you want to use these functions that are inside of it, creates an object of the class, and lets it call its own functions when needed to. So let's go ahead and do that. My favorite way of registering a game object, there's plenty of ways, as you can see here. We got register factory macro. We have register vehicle object macro. We have another register factory, register game object, and a register game object extension. Multiple ways. Some will work for your purpose. Well, you probably have an idea of how you want it to work, and most of these won't work the way you think they will. They have their purpose, but I'm guessing you guys want to be able to add it to the editor, play with it around with the editor, add it to your level with the editor, have access with the editor, and all that jazz. So my favorite way of doing so is using this macro called register game objects. Now you may say, well, aren't we making a game object extension? Yes. But you may say, why don't we just use the register game objects extension? I've tried, but no access to the editor. So register game object is what you want. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add, I always do this to make sure I can find my code later. So my code is separate from Crytek's. So rich start, rich end. I do that every time I add code. That way I can use the search function up here and find all my code. So let's go ahead and register game object. What is the format of this, you may ask? Well, the factory that's going to register, or the framework that's going to register your class, in this case, it will almost always be, when you're creating a game object, the iGame framework. So in this particular case, a pointer was already made inside the game factory CPP called p framework that points to the iGame framework. So the first parameter is almost always will be iGame framework pointer, a pointer to the iGame framework. Second parameter is the name of your class that you want to register. In this case, the name of our class we want to register is C tutorial CPP entity. So go ahead. Now it'll come up with the error because I put the name there. Third parameter is the path to the Lua script if your entity uses one. In this case, I'm going to do one without a Lua script. So empty strings here. Empty strings. First is the factory that registers it, or the framework that registers your entity, your game object. The second is the name of your class that it's registering. Third is the path to the Lua script that's being used, if you so choose. Now, all done, except for the fact we still have an error here. What this error is saying is that when you register a game object, a C is automatically prepended, I think that's the word, I guess, prepended to your class. So get rid of the C. Well, let me add the C in. It works better if I do it this way. Of course, this file knows nothing about our class because we didn't include it. So include, what is this? Tutorial CPP entity, obviously. So register factory, here we go. Get rid of the C. We still have an error. See the error? Object of abstract class C tutorial CPP entity is not allowed. Remember I said it was going to create an object of this class so that it can call its own functions in the class? Well, our class is all abstract. We got these zeros at the end here, so let's get rid of these zeros. And most likely I'll end up building it so I can actually get some real errors to know what's going on here. This is very normal. Now it tries to create an object out of the class. But it can't do it because it's an abstract class. Abstract classes, classes that include the virtual keyword. In this case, our class does include the virtual keyword. As long as all of the functions from the class you're deriving from is all accounted for, like every single class that you have, every single function is here that's inside of the other one and it's all defined, even having virtual will allow you to make an object of the class. So let's get rid of these zeros here because this is all abstract. So these are all definitions here. Declarations. Ba, 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 ba. So I'm making these into definitions. You guys should know what a definition is now by adding these opening and closing curly brackets, meaning what the function does. Don't worry, I know it's confusing here, but I will do a perfect job, I think, describing this afterwards.
Going from day to night is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Introducing Scarlet, Aries new adjustable cleavage bar. 1 drop, 3 levels of lift.
I'm still here.
For a limited time, get 40% off Scarlet. Find free shipping, free returns, and additional sizes at Aerie.com. Pretty goes with everything. Aerie lingerie.
Have you heard the news? Xfinity has just doubled the speeds on 2 of their fastest internet
Like I said, just making these into definitions.
for free. So you can be more online with all your devices in half the time. That so-called Fios revolution comes with higher prices on their most common internet plans. So double your speed for free with Xfinity. America's most popular choice for high-speed internet. Now that's the real revolution. Call or click today for a great offer on Xfinity from Comcast.
And I gotta delete all these freaking
Just get it.
I just wish we knew the right time to buy. Now's the right time.
semicolons.
It's your chance to get the summer's best deal on Camry.
I know it's oh shit. No. Okay. Bump. Get memory usage. Forgot that one. Oh my lord. Okay. So it's all good. It's all set. So let me add a C here. Boom. And it doesn't know where to find it. Why? Because it automatically, like I said, for some reason, it prepends a C before the class name and when you register a game object automatically. So what it's actually saying, even though it's the name of your class, what it's doing is it's saying C tutorial C++ entity, because it automatically puts a C. So just boop. There we go. So it's all fine. So name of the framework that registers the class, the name of your class, and then if you have a Lua file that you want to use as well for Lua interaction, put this name here. It's relative to the game folder, so from scripts all the way to the Lua file. From scripts all the way to the Lua file. Okay? There we go. We have all that. Now, if we go ahead and run this, and we can see here, we have all the functions here. They're all overridden. Let's go ahead and load this up. We may get some errors. I hope we do. So I can show you how to solve them. Okay, cool. Let's just letting us know that these declarations here are bool. They're all Boolean, and I made a definition Again, because when you override virtual functions from a class, you have to make, in order to make an object of the class, you need to make sure that you have all the functions that the previous class has, as well as define what the class does in order to make everything complete and able to make an object. So I just add definitions here to what it does. These will do nothing. Even though they get called, they'll get to the code and they're empty, so they won't do anything, which is fine. But at this point, they all must return a value. So virtual bool, you know, not the best code, but just to get rid of these errors right now, return TRUE. And make it confusing, but this definition is the same as writing this, guys. See? We have this, which is a definition. Pretty cool. I just kept it on one line. I was being lazy. Okay. And let's see, another bool. And you get more bools, void, bool. Return, because obviously if you said it was a bool, it has to return something. So, bool. So you would not put these in here. Bad code right now, but like I said, I'm just trying to get this to work. To show you. That's a bool, so. Okay. That won't work. I'm just curious to see if it will. Get RMI base. I don't even think we need that. Get RMI base. So I just deleted it. I don't even think we need it. And go ahead and build again. It may tell me that the return type is not the same. Oh, that's good. Awesome, awesome. So all these have valid definitions now. Let's go ahead and launch the editor since we registered it. I'm going to load up a level. What do we got here? What level did I open again? I can't remember what level I just opened. I thought I opened the forest, but maybe not. Depending on how long it's... Seeing how long it's loading, yeah, I loaded up the forest level. Good. Oh! I do want to show off one of my models that I made. Kind of proud of it, because I'm not typically... I can model, you know, things really well, I guess. Certain things, but I'm kind of proud of one of these models I made for one of my games, so I want to show that off after. Hurry up, load the fuck up. Ah, finally. Give it a few seconds. Pretty cool. I like the tessellation. Anyways, really low. This forest level is crazy though. I have two GTX 470s in SLE here. I know they're old graphics cards, but they're pretty damn good. I paid like 400 each for them when they first came out. And I still get 22 frames per second. It sucks, you know? Anyways. So watch, go to the entities now and go into the defaults. And you're going to see tutorial CPP entity. Cool. Now we can add this through the editor now. And it will call all of its functions that are in the new class you created. Pretty cool, huh? But this is why I said if you don't have a Lua file, it's kind of useless to add it in the editor. You may get some of the functionalities, but there's no model file, there's no collision, there's no nothing. All this is imaginary source code floating in the editor that you can't collide with, can't see, can't do anything with. But you do have interactions. Now, that's the use of registering with the game object. Register game object, one that I like the best. Gives the most functionality in my opinion. It adds support for the editor, but without the Lua file, it does shit. Okay. Pretty cool. Just wanted to show you that. Now we have access to the editor. My bad. I want to do something. So let's override some of these functions so we can actually get our object to do something. Pretty cool. I'm excited, guys. I'm excited to show you this. So let's go ahead and there's an update function here that gets called every frame depending on if the slot is updated. First, let's go ahead and override the init function. So I'm going to grab everything here. I'm actually going to delete the definition for it. Make it a declaration now. And actually create the definition where it's supposed to be in the CPP file. So my class is called C tutorial. Actually, let me just add it. Bink. There we go. And we added also the class that it comes from. And since I'm a lazy motherfucker, let's just go ahead and copy and paste. I hate typing if I don't need to. Now let's define what this init function does. This function gets called automatically, and to prove it, I'm going to put this here. Just to have something here. And as well include. And I'm going to do an overview of this, guys, when I'm finally done. So if there's any confusions, I'll cover it up at the end. Tutorial CPP answer 2. This won't do anything, by the way, guys. It's just here so I can have code here. And I'm going to put a breakpoint. And this is the point. Now, when this function is called, you guys know what breakpoints are, obviously. When the function's called, it'll come down and it'll stop. It'll stop the whole process and bring me to here. Since I don't have the entity in the level, remember I didn't save or anything, so my entity's not in the level whatsoever, and I'm going to run. And we're going to see if this breakpoint is hit or not. Okay? Actually, I could have just done this. Can you go check on our kids, honey? Let's open up a little level so it takes less to do to load. Nada. Breakpoint wasn't hit, was it? No, Rich, it wasn't. Yep, you're right. So breakpoint wasn't hit. That's because our object wasn't created yet, so our code is not going to be called. Okay? Default tutorial CPP entity. Oh, I dragged into the level. What happens? Its init function was created. Since we added this class to the editor, it says, oops, time to initialize, and as you can see, the breakpoint immediately went in. Pretty cool. So I place this class in the editor, and now it will access all of its code that you have. Because the game object class is calling the init function, but since we overrid the function in this class and registered this class, now it will call its own init function instead of the game object's init function. So we can add our own custom code into the init function, and it'll run that instead. That's how one of the ways we control our entity. And obviously it doesn't really do anything. Again, like I said, the code is just imaginary code. Okay? And there we go. Pretty cool, right? So, another cool thing about overriding and deriving from classes, you can actually call the class you derive from, you can call their functions as well. Now, typically what I like to do, if I don't override a function, like this init function, I really won't do anything really too much. I don't have any code I want to put in this init function. So I just have it call its parent function. Usually. If I don't override the code, I just have it call its parent function. So if, meaning I'll let the game object code handle the initialization of our entity, because the init function is already done inside of the game object. Since I have no code to write, I'll let the actual game object stuff initialize this entity and do what it needs to. So if, and the init function returns true or false, so if the initialization was successful, it will return true. So see game object extension game objects extension init, and the parameter it takes is the game object. Just like see this init takes a game object, p game object. So we'll give it the function here. So when it comes to the initializations, it's going to say I'm writing this code to show you what you maybe what you should do when you don't have when you overridden a function but you don't have any code to add. This is something you probably should do. That's what I'm showing you here, how to handle stuff that you don't do yourself, but calling its parent function to do the stuff instead of, because if you have nothing to override, it's basically would be calling the init function of the game object extension anyways. But since you overridden it, it won't call the game object extension function. It'll call yours, and in yours you have nothing to add, so stuff won't get done. So I just had it call its parent. We extended from the game objects extension, so we have access to its function. So we told in the init function just to call its parent's init function, so it handles it. So we're going to call the init function, and it's going to return true or false. So all the stuff in handling an init function is going to happen. So our entity is going to properly be initialized, which is cool, by the iGameObject extension class. And if it returns true, successful, if it returns false, we're going to return false that our init wasn't successful because the parent class wasn't able to initialize it because it returned false. So we're going to return false as ourselves. This exclamation point means not. It's a reverse. It's like a reverse operator kind of. If it's true, it'll make it false. If it's false, it'll make it true. So this basically is a way of saying if it's not true. So if it's not true, there we go. So if it doesn't initialize, return false. If it does initialize, we're just going to return true. So we just let the parent class that we derive from handle initialization because we had nothing to add. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. So let's go override another function. This is a void. I know this. I'm not looking in the other class, but I know my C tutorial PPP entity has a update function. Update means every frame this is going to be called depending on what the if the entity is allowed to have updates or not, and you control that as well. And these are the parameters that it takes. The S entity update context and the update slot, the slot that's being updated of the entity. We haven't really talked about slots. We'll do that eventually, not in this tutorial though. But we really don't need these at this point. I haven't found a use for them currently with what I do. So for the update, this is what happens. You know, this is all what happens every frame. We can do stuff every single frame for the entity. Watch, I'll show you. This will get run as well. Game object. I'm going to enable update slot I want to see if this code is run here to see if the entity is updated. And we got to make sure that's a declaration, not a definition. So this code 1+1 will be updated every single frame if the entity is updated. Unresolved external symbol. I have no idea. That's not what I meant to do. Apparently this is not gonna work. But anyways, what you want to do with the initialization is make sure you set game object. You always want to set the game object if you can't call the parent, like I can't right now. Set the game object and make sure you have your p game object and then return true. Okay. So let's go ahead. Oh, whoops, not what I wanted to do. Oh my god, it's hot in here. How's the AC? Can you, What is he watching? The what? The Little Einsteins? When did he start watching that? And we're just going to test to see if it's updates every frame. I added it, right? Stupid thing. There we go. There we go. It wouldn't let me set a breakpoint on that. 1 + 1. What are you watching? Cinderella story? Maybe. I don't know, not really.
What? He's better than whatever they said.
And doesn't update every frame. See, this function is not getting called because the entity currently doesn't have its updates enabled. So that's what I wanted to show you. Now he says update gets run every frame, but if the entity doesn't have any, if it's not updated, then, you know, it won't be updated. And what is the function for that here? Anyways, we're going to enable updates. Get game object. I think that's a function. We're going to get the game object of the entity. So this is what happens. The entity calls this update function every frame. Actually, not the best place to put it. It won't get called, actually. So on the initialization, we're going to get the game object. In this case, we can just use the pGame object. Because it's passed to the init function anyways. So there's an object. You create an object of a class, right? Well, when we drag that entity into the level, we did that. That's creating an object of the class. So that object is going to call this entity. So that object is going to call its function get game object. So we're going to get its game object. We got it already. So we're going to use the game object, it meaning itself, and we're going to enable update slot. And the slot iGame object extension. Enable update slot. And the first parameter is the iGame object extension. The second parameter is the slot you want to update. Usually you want to just do slot 0. Slot 0 is the default slot for the entity. We haven't learned about slots yet, but we will eventually. So it makes an iGame object extension, meaning the object you want to enable updates for. In this case, we are the game object calling this, so we'll just use the this pointer and the slot 0. This pointer means this class. The object that's calling this function, which in this case the entity we place in the level is calling this function, so this means that object that's calling this function is what we want to enable updates for in 0. Pretty simple, right? So when we drag the object into the level, it created an object of the C tutorial CVP entity class, and it's then going to call its own init function when it gets created, and it already passes along its game object. So that we're going to take the game object, meaning the entity itself, we're going to enable update slot. It means we're going to be adding want calls to the update every frame, and we're going to pass in this, which is itself, and 0. It means we want to update the slot 0. 0 is the default slot for entity. Okay. Global environment P log. I'm using the global environment to access Cryengine's log system. And what I want to say, updates enabled. It's going to log this to the console. And this should work. I'm going to be stopping the tutorial soon to do part 2 in a second. I'm going to continue recording. I just don't want to get over 2 hours long because it won't upload the HD version. And it'll all be simplified at the end. Trying to program something I didn't plan beforehand and trying to teach is a little difficult. But I want to show you my workflow of how I do things, how I figure out things, you know, and then walk you through it. And then if there's any confusions, because I know I've messed up a couple times, then I'll just clarify all at the end how to do it. Okay? So, take the entity, defaults. And we got no updates.
Introducing Kellogg's Cryengine, a totally different breed of chocolate cereal. Wicked crunch outside,
going to try something else, guys. This right here, this get entity, is a member of the game object extension, and you can call it to say, hey, I'm an object, I've called the entity, the init function, and I want to get the entity of myself, and then I want to call my own function of the entity activate. And do we want to activate it? GRUE. And there we go. Activating turns on updates as well. It could be an issue that I'm doing it in the init, but let's go ahead. I might have to do it in the post init at this point, but that should be fine. Might end up with a error here, because even though it's an init function, it may not be completely initialized. I most likely have to do it into the post init function. After it initializes, then it calls the post init, and then I can do it there. I think that's what I have to do, but we'll see.
I wanted to make a change and come to Seacoast because I wanted to take charge of my own life. Before I even got here, I was impressed because they were so
So let's go ahead and override the post init function.
inviting. The minute I walked into that school and I started taking classes, I realized that I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to make this really happen. Some of my students have never heard of Yes You Can in their entire life. And we as a team, we
It's in the
that not only can they, but they will.
The wealth of knowledge here is unreal.
don't take any parameters.
Anticipated.
The future for healthcare is excellent. Healthcare is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be around for years and years and years to come. The future is really, really bright for me. I know it. And they've given me the skills here. I mean, I had the drive, but Seacoast has really, led me a long way. And I'm going to be, who knows, maybe something big though.
Okay. See here, post init. During the post initialization, the extension is now contained in the game object.
Since you met him in that Princeton chat room, okay? You talk to him all the time, you know him.
I know, but he doesn't know me. What if I meet him and I know what he expects? Maybe this whole relationship is better for cyberspace.
Ba-ba.
You have to go to that dance.
See, this is stuff I go through every day.
Guy isn't gonna be
I just not like magically learned Cryengine. I just spent a lot of time with it. Okay. We're going to do two things. First of all, we're going to get the thing here. And blah, blah, blah. Okay. Get the entity and activate it. And then we're going to take the actual object. We're going to do two things. We're going to activate the entity and activate the update slot.
Now that's impressive. So what are you and Shelby going to the dance as?
What is this movie again on?
I'm gonna go with Shelby.
Cinderella story. Okay, jeez. Hilary Duff, good, got it. Hilary Duff, awesome.
I really like what's her face more than Hilary Duff. They don't have their own show. It's like wild.
Yeah, when I was younger, a lot younger, she was big. But now she's not in any movies.
Neither is Lindsay Lohan.
I know.
Drugs and all that stuff.
It's all taken care of. Son, you've been working on this program since you were 9 years old. You're gonna go play USC football, you're gonna graduate, and then you're gonna manage this business. The future's set. So let's get it. All right? It's not a custom. Go from that.
Okay. Yep. As you can see, I hit a breakpoint because it's now updating every single frame. What happened was I was trying to update the entity and an initialize function, which unfortunately at this point in time in the init function, everything wasn't all set, ready to go. But on the post init function, everything was all set and ready to go. Now I can enable the updates. We can get rid of the get entity activate equals true because, to be honest, I believe that the actual thing it's updating is enable update slot. So let's go ahead and do that. Default. And there you go. So pgame object enable update slot. Because I'm guessing an entity, well, you're actually registering a game object. That's what things you can place in the world. And to further extend it, a game object includes an entity as well. So on top of a game object, you also lies the entity as well. So you're taking the game object, okay? Because when the post init function is called, it already passes in the game object that's supposed to be doing the function. So we take that object, which is the entity that's in our world, and enable the updates. This, we want to enable this, and 0. We want update slot 0. That way you get calls every frame to this. Pretty cool, huh? So that's basically showing you how you can do create an entity in C++, manage it in C++, and do stuff with it in C++ by making a class and deriving it from C game object extension helper, the class you want to derive from here, iGame object extension, and your class that you're using. And then you just drag and drop all the functions from the iGame object extension class in here. Yep. And then you just override them. Put stuff in these code here that you want to do with your entity. I'm not done, guys. This is just part 1. And part 1 is going to be up. Part 2 is going to be up immediately because I'm actually continuing the tutorial right now, but I'm stopping the video so it's not too long. Please, I recommend don't create an entity in C++ right now because the tutorial is not done. Yes, all the stuff is in here to do it, but please wait until I do part 2 to start creating your entity. I would really appreciate it. Okay. Thank you.